The kick lands before anyone in that ballroom understands what they're watching. Yi-Won Choi's shoe catches the back of a bent knee, and the woman in the gray housekeeping uniform drops the mop she's holding. It clatters against the marble, the sound sharper than it should be, cutting straight through 100 overlapping conversations. Behind him, a woman in a red dress laughs into her champagne glass. Someone else already has a phone out, filming, angling for the best light. Nobody helps her up. 300 of the most dangerous people in the country are standing in that room, and every one of them decides, in the same half-second, that she isn't worth a second look. That's the mistake. She doesn't cry out. She doesn't scramble to her feet. She goes still, the kind of stillness that should have warned somebody if anyone in that room had known what it actually meant. Then her hand closes around his ankle. Yi-Won doesn't register the grip until the floor is already coming up to meet him. 200 pounds of imported marble under a man who hasn't hit the ground in front of anyone since he was 19 years old, and now he's flat on his back in front of every syndicate boss in Seoul who came tonight specifically to watch him for signs of weakness. The silence afterward isn't shock. It's arithmetic. Every person in that room running the same equation at once. Who is she? And what did we just watch happen to the man we're all supposed to be afraid of? 3 weeks earlier, nobody in the Chinji Tower would have looked at Aaliyah Marsh twice either. She came in before 6 most mornings, pushed a cart down the executive floor, emptied trash cans holding more loose cash than most people saw in a year, and left before the first meeting started. Gray uniform, eyes down. Excuse me to men who wouldn't have noticed if she'd said nothing at all. 10 years of practice does that to a person. 10 years of making sure nobody remembers your face. She hadn't planned on Seoul. She hadn't planned on any of it, cleaning floors in a tower owned by a man 12 years younger than the last person who ever taught her anything worth knowing. But when your teacher dies protecting a secret, and the secret is you stop making plans. You start making rooms to vanish into. Hers had a mop in it. That was the whole trick. Nobody suspects the woman with the mop. She'd learned, over the years, to like the anonymity of it more than she probably should have. There was a strange comfort in being invisible on purpose, in knowing that when men like Yi-Won Choi walked past her in a hallway, they registered her the way they registered the potted plants or the framed art. Present, ignorable, safe. She hadn't expected, on the handful of mornings their paths actually crossed, to notice things about him anyway. The way he always took his coffee black, no exceptions, like sugar was a weakness he refused himself. The way he never once looked at his phone while walking, which told her he trusted almost no one enough to be distracted in a hallway. The way his shoulders dropped, just slightly, the 2 mornings he thought no one was in the executive kitchen. The only 2 mornings she'd ever seen him look like an actual person instead of a name people said with caution in their voice. She hadn't meant to notice any of that. Old habits. You watch a room for exits and threats long enough, you end up watching people too, even the ones you're supposed to be furniture around. Until the night, Chinji threw a gala for its biggest investors, and somebody forgot to keep the cleaning staff off that floor. Yi-Won Choi hadn't built the empire his father left him. He'd inherited it, then spent 5 years proving to men twice his age that inheritance wasn't the same thing as weakness. He'd learned to walk into a room already owning everyone in it, because in his world hesitation gets people killed, and even borrowed confidence keeps the wolves at a distance instead of closing in. Tonight the wolves were closer than usual. 2 rival syndicates sat across the room, pretending they hadn't come to watch Chinji lose its grip on contracts that used to go uncontested. Yi-Won knew exactly what they were waiting for. He knew how thin the ice was under his own name, how many people in that room would smile at him and calculate his replacement in the same breath. So when he rounded the corner by the private elevator and nearly walked into a cleaner blocking the hallway, in front of the 2 men most likely to use any misstep against him, something in him reached for the cheapest kind of power available. He didn't see a person standing there. He saw an opening to look untouchable in front of men who were deciding, that very evening, whether he still deserved to be feared. "Move," he said. When she wasn't fast enough, he made sure she did. He expected her to fall the way people fall around him, apologetic, small, grateful he hadn't done worse. He did not expect the ground to open up under his own feet 10 seconds later. Here's the thing about 10 years of hiding. You learn to read a room the way other people read a menu. Aaliyah had clocked every camera angle, every guard rotation, every corner someone could box her into in her first week on that job. Habit. The kind you don't lose just because you tell yourself you don't need it anymore. She'd also made herself a promise the day she traded a weapon for a mop, that she'd let this world do whatever it wanted to her, keep her head down, and still be breathing when it was over. 10 years, she'd kept it. The kick broke something that had nothing to do with pain. She'd taken worse. It was the laughter. That specific sound of 200 people agreeing, without a word between them, that her dignity was something she'd have to earn back off the floor. She'd heard that sound once before. The last time, a man she loved like a father was dying on a training room floor, while people who thought the same thing, that a woman with nothing left to lose wasn't worth watching closely, stood by and let it happen. Her body moved before her mind caught up. That was the part that unsettled her later, replaying it. Not that she'd done it, that she hadn't decided to. His ankle was there. Her hand got there faster than a decade of discipline could stop it. And then Seoul's most feared young boss was on his back on marble he owned, staring at a ceiling he'd paid for, wondering, for the first time in longer than he could remember, exactly what he'd just started. If this is your first time coming across her story, welcome. And if you've been here since the beginning, welcome back. It's good to have you both in the same room for this one. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far this story travels. And if a woman getting back up like this means something to you, this is the moment to hit like and subscribe, because what she does with the next 24 hours is going to earn it. Nobody in the ballroom moved for a full 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a long time when 300 armed, image-obsessed people are all recalculating who's actually dangerous in the building. Yi-won recovered first, because men like him always do in public, whatever it costs them later. He stood slowly, not because he needed to. Slow was a message. This doesn't rattle me, even while his jaw had gone tight enough to crack a molar. He looked at her, properly for the first time, not the uniform, not the cart, her. She hadn't run, hadn't apologized. She stood with her weight settled low, hands loose, watching him the way you watch a dog that might still bite even after it stops growling. And underneath the fury, because there was fury, real and immediate, something else moved through him too, something he didn't have a name for yet. She wasn't looking at him with fear. Nobody looked at him without fear. It had been so long since anyone had, he almost didn't recognize what he was seeing. "Do that again," he said, quiet enough that only she and the 2 men behind him could hear. "And it won't be the floor you hit. You'll want both ankles working before you try that again," she said. Someone at the nearest table choked on a drink, trying not to laugh. Yi-won's expression didn't move, but something behind his eyes did, a recalibration, fast and involuntary, the kind he'd spent a decade training himself never to show anyone. He'd been dropped. In front of Beek from the Incheon operation and Ha from the Northern families, 2 men who'd been waiting 5 years for an opening exactly like this. And the woman who'd handed it to them was still holding a mop. "Get her out of here," he told the nearest security man, not looking away from her. "Now." They didn't handle her the way security usually handled a problem in that building. Nobody grabbed her arm. Whatever the guard had seen in the last 10 seconds made him ask her, carefully, to come with him instead. She went, not because he told her to, because staying meant explaining something she'd spent 10 years making sure nobody would ever need explained. As the guard walked her toward the service corridor, she felt Yi-won's eyes on her back the entire way, not the look of a man cataloging an enemy, but something slower, more uncertain, like he was trying to work out a math problem that refused to resolve into a clean answer. She didn't turn around. She'd survived this long by never giving anyone the satisfaction of watching her look back. By the time the elevator doors shut behind her, 3 separate phones already had the footage. By morning, 4 syndicates would have watched it. By the following evening, a man neither of them had heard from in 10 years would watch it twice, then a third time, and smile in a way that had nothing to do with amusement. Minseok Ryu hadn't seen that particular grip in a decade. He didn't need her face to know exactly whose hand it belonged to. Nobody teaches a fall like that except one lineage, and he'd spent 10 years assuming its last living heir had either died quietly or vanished so completely it no longer mattered. He made a call. "I know who she is," he told the voice on the other end, "and I know exactly what she's worth to the right buyer. If you've ever been the person everyone assumed was small, this next part is for you. What happens to her over the next day is going to test everything she built to survive." Aaliyah didn't go home that night. Home, if you could call it that, was one room above a laundromat 40 minutes out, and she'd learned a long time ago that the moment someone sees you, you stop trusting the last place they watched you leave. She walked for 2 hours in the cold, doubling back twice, cutting through a market that had closed at midnight and an alley with no working lights. Old habits, older fears. By the time she believed nobody had followed her, her hands had finally stopped shaking, not from the cold. She sat on a low wall behind a shuttered noodle shop and let herself say, out loud, for the first time in 10 years, the thing she'd refused to think in a complete sentence. They saw me. Not the kick, not the laughing, the grip, the fall. The one motion that belonged to a dying art and a dead teacher and a promise she'd made to a man bleeding out on a training floor, telling her to run and never let anyone see what he'd given her. She'd kept that promise for 10 years. She'd broken it in 4 seconds, over a mop and a bruised knee and a stranger's cruelty, and now she had no idea whether that stranger, or the men watching him do it, understood what they'd actually seen. Some of them clearly did. She'd caught it in 2 faces before security walked her out. Not curiosity, appetite. She thought of her sister, half a world away, in a life Aaliyah had deliberately built to keep this out of. Grace didn't know where she was. Hadn't known in 6 years, the price of keeping her safe from a world that collects its debts by taking the people you love. She thought, too, unwillingly, of the look on Yiwon's face in that half-second before security had walked her out. Not rage. Something closer to recognition, though he had no way of knowing what he was recognizing. She told herself it didn't matter what a man like that thought about anything. She told herself that twice, which was usually a sign she didn't believe it the first time. Aaliyah stood, pulled her collar up against the wind, and did the only thing she still knew how to do when the walls started closing in. She walked toward the one place she'd sworn she'd never go back to. Yiwon didn't sleep either, for entirely different reasons. He sat in what he still, 4 years after the funeral, thought of as his father's office, because some rooms don't change ownership just because the name on the deed does, and replayed the fall until the replaying stopped being about pride and started being about something closer to unease. He wasn't a man who got outmaneuvered. His whole reputation ran on never once looking uncertain in front of people waiting for exactly that. And a woman with a mop had put him on his back in under 2 seconds, in front of the 2 rivals most likely to use it against him. He should have been furious. He was furious. But underneath it, quieter, was a question he didn't like sitting with. Where does a cleaner learn to do that? He pulled her personnel file. American. 5 years with the contractor his building used. Background check clean. References thin but not flagged. Nothing that explained that grip. There was a photo attached to the file, small and administrative, the kind taken for a badge rather than a memory. He found himself looking at it longer than the file warranted. She didn't smile in it. Most people forced something for a badge photo, a flicker of politeness for whoever was holding the camera. She hadn't bothered. It was the first thing about her that struck him as honest. He watched the footage 11 times before he made himself stop. On the 12th pass, he wasn't watching his own fall anymore. He was watching her face in the half-second before her hand moved, no panic in it. Just a terrible, practiced calm, like something in her had simply clicked into place because it had been waiting there the whole time. Nobody teaches themselves to look like that by accident. His phone buzzed. A number he recognized but hadn't heard from in 4 years. Minseok Ryu, a name he mostly remembered from his father's old business dinners, back when the two families still bothered pretending to be allies. "We should talk about your cleaner," the message read. "I know what she is. I know what she's worth. And I know you don't have the first idea what you almost got yourself killed touching." He read it twice, then stood, straightened his jacket, and went looking for the one person who might tell him what had actually just walked out of his building. He told himself that was the only reason he wanted to find her again. He told himself that on the drive over too, which, like Aaliyah's own doubled reassurances, was usually a sign of exactly the opposite. Welcome to everyone joining partway through. You haven't missed the ending, because there isn't one yet, and that's exactly the point. If you're new, stick around, because this story only gets more tangled from here. And if you've been watching since the first upload, thank you for still being here. Tell me in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from tonight. And if this story's earned it, go ahead and hit that subscribe button before the next part, because it's about to get a lot more complicated for both of them. She found the address from memory, without asking anyone. A converted warehouse on the edge of the industrial district that used to house something else entirely before her teacher, Master Han Yun-ti, quietly turned part of it into a training floor almost nobody outside a short list ever knew existed. He'd been dead 6 years. The building had likely changed hands twice since. She wasn't after the building. She was after what was buried underneath it, a floor safe he'd shown her exactly once, told her about exactly once, and made her swear she'd only open if there was no other choice left. There was no other choice now. She got in through a gap in the fence that was still, 6 years later, exactly where it had always been. The main floor stood stripped to bare concrete, smelling of dust and cold metal instead of the sweat and chalk she remembered. She stood there a long moment before she moved, letting the old ache of the place settle over her. The ghost of 100 mornings spent on this floor learning to fall without breaking, to strike without hesitating, to disappear without ever really leaving. She found the loose panel by feel more than sight, tucked into a corner nobody had bothered renovating. The safe held 3 things: a photograph, a folded letter she'd never opened, because her teacher had told her not to until the day came when she needed things he hadn't lived long enough to explain himself, and a small, worn token, the kind used generations back to let one Hukwa lineage member recognize another, from a time when there were still enough of them left to need it. She sat on the cold floor, with the letter unopened in her lap, longer than she meant to before she broke the seal. If you're reading this, the world found you before I could finish teaching you how to be found on your own terms. I'm sorry for that. One more thing I never told you, because I didn't know it myself until the very end. The man whose family money runs through half this city's underworld is the son of a man who once tried to save me. Not destroy me. Save me. If his son ever comes looking for you, don't assume he's his father's enemy. Assume, instead, that neither of you knows the whole truth yet, and that the truth, when you find it, won't be the one your enemies want either of you to believe. She read it twice. A third time, slower, because the first 2 times her mind had simply refused to let the words mean what they clearly meant. Choi Di-sung, Yi-won's father. A name she'd heard attached to half the rumors circulating through 10 years of cleaning up after his son, without once connecting the two. She thought back to the kitchen mornings, the black coffee, the 2 times she'd seen him look like an actual person instead of a headline. She hadn't wanted to notice any of that. She noticed it anyway, and now here was her teacher's handwriting telling her the noticing might mean something she wasn't prepared to deal with tonight, of all nights. Gravel shifted behind her, under a shoe that wasn't hers. She was on her feet before she finished turning, letter folded and tucked away in the same motion, every old habit awake and answering at once. Yi-won Choi stood in the doorway of a building he clearly hadn't expected to find her in either, looking at her the way a man looks at a puzzle that just handed him an extra piece he didn't ask for. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The quiet stretched out longer than either strictly needed it to, long enough that Aaliyah felt it settle somewhere under her ribs, unwelcome and entirely too familiar. She recognized the feeling. She just didn't want to. "I followed a name," he said finally. Not you, I didn't know you'd be here. Then you followed the wrong name to the right place, she said. That's worse for you than you think. He stepped further in, not fast, not threatening. The careful step of a man beginning to suspect the woman in front of him could put him on the floor again without trying very hard. Minseok Ryu reached out to me tonight, he said. Says he knows what you are, says there's a price on it. I want to know if he's lying before every syndicate on this peninsula decides to find out for themselves. Her grip tightened, just slightly, around the folded letter. The one nomming his father as something other than the enemy she'd spent a decade assuming he had to be. You don't want to know what I am, she said quietly. You want to know what I'm worth. There's a difference. It's about to get people killed either way. Then help me understand the difference, he said. Because right now you're the only person in this city who might be more dangerous than the men hunting you, and I'd like to know which side of that you're planning to land on. She held his gaze a beat too long, and he held it right back, neither of them willing to be the one who looked away first. It wasn't a standoff anymore. It hadn't been for several seconds. Something had shifted into the space between them that neither of them had a polite word for. Not trust, not yet, but the first uneasy cousin of it, the kind that shows up uninvited and refuses to leave once it's arrived. You're starring, she said. So are you. Neither of them stopped. He took one more step, close enough now that she could see the fatting shadow of a bruise along his jaw from where he'd hit the marble, close enough that the low warehouse light caught something unguarded in his expression before he remembered to put it away. She didn't step back. She noted, with some irritation at herself, that she didn't want to. You're bleeding, she said, nodding at his hand, where a scrape from the fall had opened along his knuckles without either of them noticing until now. You're observant for someone who spends her mornings emptying trash cans. You're arrogant for someone who got taken down by a woman holding a mop. The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile gone before it fully arrived. Touché. For one unguarded second, something almost soft passed between them, the kind of look that has no business existing between a man who'd humiliated her hours earlier and the woman who'd humiliated him right back. Aaliyah felt it first as warmth, then as warning. She'd learned a long time ago that warmth was the most dangerous feeling there was, because it made you forget to watch the door. She stepped back, not far, just enough. He noticed the retreat and, to his credit, didn't chase it. You don't trust easily, he said. It wasn't a question. I don't trust at all, she said. It's kept me alive. So has this, he said, gesturing faintly at the space between them, at the whole strange collision of their 2 nights. So far. A car door closed somewhere outside. Then another. Footsteps, more than one set, moving with the unhurried confidence of men who already believed they had every exit covered. Aaliyah's eyes cut past him toward the door, every trace of that softness gone in an instant, replaced by the same stillness that had dropped him to the marble hours earlier. We're about to find out together, she said, sooner than either of us wanted. He didn't ask what she meant. He'd already heard the second car door. How many? He asked low. At least 4, maybe 6. She was already moving toward the stack of old crates along the east wall, positioning herself between the door and the exposed safe, between the door and him. You should go. This isn't your fight yet. It became my fight the second Ryu texted me your name. He shrugged out of his jacket, dropping it over a crate without ceremony, rolling his sleeves in a motion that told her he'd done this before, that the tailored suits and the reputation weren't the whole of what he was. Tell me what you need. She looked at him for one more second, weighing something she didn't have time to weigh properly. Stay behind me, she said, and don't be a hero. Heroes get people killed. Then what should I be? Useful, she said, and moved toward the door before he could answer. The footsteps outside had stopped. That was worse than if they'd kept coming. Stopped footsteps meant someone was listening at the door, and someone listening at the door meant someone who already knew, or suspected, exactly what was waiting on the other side of it. Yi-won came up beside her, closer than strictly necessary, close enough that she could feel the tension radiating off him, coiled and ready in a way that told her he wasn't nearly as soft as the tailored suits suggested. For one absurd half-second, with armed men outside a door and her whole hidden life unraveling in real time, she found herself thinking about how steady his breathing was, how he hadn't asked a single unnecessary question, how some men fell apart under pressure and some men went quiet and sharp, and he was, infuriatingly, the second kind. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, not looking at her, eyes on the door, "I'm not walking out on you, whatever you are, whatever Ryu thinks you're worth." She didn't answer. She didn't trust her voice not to give away more than she meant to. The door handle turned. If you've made it this far into tonight's story, thank you for staying with it. Whether you found this yesterday or you've been here since episode 1, it means the same thing to me either way. Before the door opens, take a second to hit like and subscribe if this one's gotten under your skin the way it's meant to, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one. Now, let's see who's on the other side of that door. The door didn't open the way either of them expected. It didn't burst inward with the crash of men storming a room they were confident they owned. It opened slowly, deliberately, the way a door opens when the person on the other side wants you to understand, before anything else happens, exactly how unafraid they are. 4 men filed in first, spreading along the walls with the practiced ease of people who'd cleared rooms like this more times than either Aaliyah or Yiwon cared to guess. 2 more waited in the doorway, silhouetted against the streetlight outside, close enough to block the exit without bothering to look like they were doing it on purpose. Aaliyah counted them without moving her eyes off the last man to walk in, the one who wasn't in a hurry, who took his time letting the door swing shut behind him, who looked at her the way a collector looks at something he's been waiting a very long time to finally hold. She hadn't seen Minseok Ryu in 10 years. He'd been leaner then, hungrier in a way that had nothing to do with food. 10 years and a great deal of money had smoothed some of that hunger into something colder and far more patient. "Aaliyah," he said, like they were old friends meeting for coffee instead of strangers standing in a gutted warehouse with 6 armed men between them and the door. "You look well for a woman the world thought was dead." "You look like a man who spent 10 years lying to people who trusted him," she said. "Some things don't change." Something flickered across his face. Not shame. Nothing so simple as shame, but the brief, irritated twitch of a man who didn't enjoy being reminded of the things he'd done to get here. His eyes moved past her, landing on Yiwon with open, unhurried curiosity. "And you brought company. Choi Yiwon. Your father would have found this deeply amusing, I think, standing in a building you don't recognize, next to a woman whose secrets are worth more than everything you own." "My father isn't here to have an opinion," Yiwon said evenly. "So you'll have to settle for mine. And mine is that you should walk your men back out that door before this stops being a conversation." Minseok smiled, unbothered, the smile of a man who'd already counted the numbers in the room and liked his side of the math. "I'm not here for you, Choi. Not tonight. I'm here to have a conversation with an old friend about what she's worth, and to whom, and how quietly this can go if she's sensible about it." "I'm not for sale," Aaliyah said. "Everyone's for sale," Minseok said. "I learned that from the same man who taught you how to fall without breaking. Masterhan just never wanted to admit it applied to him too, in the end." His gaze sharpened. "You know what I want. You've always known. The Hukwa didn't die with him. It's sitting right there, inside you, and there are people on 3 continents who would pay more than you can imagine to make sure it doesn't disappear with you too." "It already disappeared once," Aaliyah said. "The day you decided it was worth more to you broken up and sold in pieces than kept whole and honest. That's the day it actually died. Everything since has just been you pretending otherwise." The air in the room changed. Yiwon felt it before he understood it, the particular quality of silence that comes right before violence, the held breath of men who are being paid to hurt people and are simply waiting for permission. "Last chance to make this easy," Minseok said. "I don't do easy," Aaliyah said. "Ask him." She tipped her head very slightly toward Yiwon. "He found that out the hard way in front of 300 witnesses." Minseok's eyes cut to Yiwon with fresh interest, reassessing something. "Is that so?" She put me on the floor of my own building, Yi-won said, and something in his voice, not quite pride, not quite warning, something new and unfamiliar even to him, made Min Seok's smile falter for the first time since he'd walked in. In front of Beek and Ha both. So before your men decide tonight is the night they earn their money, you might want to ask yourself whether 6 of them is actually enough. For a moment, nobody moved. Aaliyah felt Yi-won's shift almost imperceptibly closer to her, not crowding her, just close enough that if this went the way it was about to go, there'd be no space between them for anyone to slip through. 6 is usually enough, Min Seok said quietly. But I take your point. Let's find out. And then the room, which had been holding its breath for what felt like a very long time, finally let it go.